This flavorful 5-color deck is a snow-focused build. Each card in the 99 is either a snow card or has snow synergies. With a limited card pool from which to draw due to the preferred theme of this deck, the snow-related synergies and effects within the 99 uphold this build's relevance at the table. Surprisingly, there is a more than adequate amount of snow-related ramp, removal, and disruption spells available for this deck. The primary win condition is combat, through either traditional combat damage or lethal commander damage. Either way, winter is coming for our opponents. The selection process for the general of this deck was a bit prohibitive, again due to the preferred theme of this deck. As there currently are no 5-color legendary snow creatures in Magic, it seemed most appropriate to select Cromat as the leader of this build. It is the only 5-color legendary creature that depicts an illustrated snow environment around which a snow deck could be crafted. Cromat debuted in Apocalypse and is a 5/5 illusion with 5 different 2-color activated abilities. These enemy color paired abilities are, for a white and a black mana, we destroy target creature blocking or blocked by Cromat. For a blue and a red mana, Cromat gains flying until end of turn. For a black and a green mana, we regenerate Cromat. For a red and a white mana, Cromat gets +1/+1 until end of turn. For a green and a blue mana, we put Cromat on top of our library. Our opponents may not view a snow-themed deck as a legitimate concern at the EDH table. However, with a threatening general and a 99 inundated with the most powerful snow cards and snow synergies available, our opponents' views may change after we win the game. We begin this deck tech by showcasing our snow land base. We have 20 snow-covered basic lands in this build, 4 of each color. These lands account for more than half of the lands in the 99. For the purposes of adhering to our snow theme, this land base is not as diverse as many other 5-color land bases. Luckily for us, Kaldheim introduced a cycle of dual-colored snow lands. These lands have 2 basic land types, enter the battlefield tapped, and tap to add one of 2 different colors of mana to our mana pool. These 10 lands bring our total of color-producing lands up to 30, but we're not done yet. Shimmerdrift Vale enters the battlefield tapped, and when it comes into play, we choose a color. This land taps to add 1 mana of the chosen color. Although it is a one-and-done choice, Shimmerdrift Vale offers an immediate source of color fixing. For some utility effects, we have Mouth of Ronom and Scrying Sheets. We can pay 4 generic mana and 1 snow mana, tap and sacrifice Mouth of Ronom to have it deal 4 damage to target creature. We can pay 1 generic mana and 1 snow mana and tap Scrying Sheets to look at the top card of our library. If that card is snow, then we may reveal it and put it into our hand. In this build, we will put that card into our hand very, very often. We have some snow lands that can become creatures as well. Frostwalk Bastion becomes a 2/3 construct artifact creature until end of turn for 1 generic mana and 1 snow mana. Whenever Frostwalk Bastion deals combat damage to a creature, we tap that creature, and it does not untap during its controller's next untap step. For 3 snow mana, Faceless Haven becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types until end of turn. And our 36th and final land in the deck is Dark Depths. This is the only land in the build that does not produce mana, but what it can produce is much more powerful. Dark Depths enters the battlefield with 10 ice counters on it. We can pay 3 generic mana and remove an ice counter from this legendary land. When Dark Depths has no ice counters on it, we sacrifice it and create Merit Lodge, a legendary 2020 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. Sending Merit Lodge into combat should produce very favorable results for us. We have a blend of various mana ramp spells and mana rocks in this deck. Into the North searches our library for a snowland and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. Glittering Frost is an aura that makes Enchanted Land a snowland. Whenever this Enchanted Land is tapped for mana, its controller adds 1 mana of any color to their mana pool. When Arkham's Astrolabe enters the battlefield, we draw a card. We can pay 1 generic mana and tap this artifact to add 1 mana of any color. This is one of our most versatile ways to color fix our mana in this build. Cold Steel Heart comes into play tapped, and when it does, we choose a color. We can tap this artifact to add 1 mana of the chosen color to our mana pool. Replicating Ring has a chance to create so much more. It itself taps for 1 mana of any color, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we may put a night counter on Replicating Ring. Then, if it has 8 or more night counters on it, we remove all of these counters and create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicated Ring. These artifact tokens can tap to add 1 mana of any color, and should advance our board state well ahead of our opponents. When the 3 Seasons enters the battlefield, and after our draw step, we add a lore counter to this saga. The first lore counter has us put the top 3 cards of our library into our graveyard. The second lore counter has us return up to 2 target snow permanent cards from our graveyard to our hand. This is not a true card drawing effect, but it does provide card advantage. When the third and last lore counter is placed onto the 3 Seasons, we sacrifice it and then choose 3 cards in each graveyard. The owners of these cards shuffle them into their libraries. The graveyard recursion provided by this saga helps to augment our resources in order to keep up with, or stay ahead of, our opponents. There are benefits to playing with a dedicated snow mana base. Graven Lore is an instant that has a scry X, where X is the amount of snow mana we spent to cast the spell. Of course, due to the snow-centric construction of our mana base, X will be 5. So after we scry 5, we draw 3 cards. Blessing of Frost distributes X +1/+1 counters among any number of creatures we control, where X is the amount of snow mana we spent to cast the spell. Then we draw a card for each creature we control with power 4 or greater. Again, since the mana base of this deck is all snow, we will distribute the maximum of 4 +1/+1 counters allotted by this spell. Hopefully, we also will maximize the number of cards we draw by having as many creatures with power of 4 or greater as possible. In this creature-heavy build, the Winter Sky is the limit. Lastly, in this section, Glacial Revelation has us reveal the top 6 cards of our library. We may put any number of snow permanent cards from among them into our hand, and then put the rest into our graveyard. At this time, 82 of the 86 permanent cards in the 99 of this deck are snow permanents, which means we have a very high chance of putting 6 cards into our hand for the investment of just 3 total mana. For building within the confines of a snow-centric theme, we have a plethora of removal spells at our disposal. Frostbite deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, but if we control at least 3 snow permanents, it deals 3 damage instead. Tundra Fumarole deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and we add colorless mana to our mana pool equal to the amount of snow mana spent to cast this spell. Until end of turn, we do not lose this mana as steps and phases end. From an overall mana perspective, we can consider this spell free to cast. Skred deals damage to target creature equal to the number of snow permanents we control. Note that this is an instant that only costs 1 red mana. Chill to the Bone destroys target non-snow creature. Blizzard Brawl has us choose target creature we control and target creature we do not control. If we control at least 3 snow permanents, then the creature we control gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Then the chosen creatures fight each other, as each creature deals damage equal to its power to the other. Our creature remains on the battlefield, and we hopefully remove one of our opponent's creatures. On Thin Ice is an aura that enchants a snow land we control. When it enters the battlefield, we exile target creature an opponent controls until On Thin Ice leaves play. We do not always have to remove our opponent's creatures from the battlefield in order to lessen their effectiveness or nullify their levels of threat. We can pay a snow mana and tap Icebind Pillar to tap target artifact or creature. We can pay 2 generic mana and sacrifice a snow land to have Sunstone prevent all combat damage that will be dealt this turn. If needed, this artifact allows us to play a longer game as we navigate the battlefield through well-timed combat and gameplay chicanery. Both Gelid Shackles and Winter's Rest are auras that enchant creatures and have similar offsetting effects. Gelid Shackles makes enchanted creature unable to block or activate its abilities. We also can pay a snow mana to give that creature Defender until end of turn. Remember, a creature with Defender cannot attack. When Winter's Rest enters the battlefield, it taps Enchanted Creature. As long as we control another snow permanent, Enchanted Creature does not untap during its controller's next untap step. Winter's Chill has the potential to be a one-sided mass removal spell. We can cast this instant only during combat and only before blockers are declared. We choose X target attacking creatures. For each of these creatures, its controller may choose to pay 0, 1, or 2 generic mana. If that player pays 2 mana, then that creature acts as normal. If that player pays 1 mana, then prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. If that player does not pay any mana, destroy that creature at the end of combat. This combat trick comes out of nowhere and has the potential to wipe out an opponent's entire army of attacking creatures, particularly if that player is tapped out. Note that we do not have to be the player attacked in order to cast the spell. If opponent number 1 is attacking opponent number 2, then we can cast Winter's Chill and target opponent number 1's creatures, and, of course, if opponent number 1 is tapped out, then their creatures will be destroyed. Also note that if 0 mana is paid for these creatures, they are destroyed after combat, meaning that they still deal combat damage before Winter's Chill destroys them. So in our earlier scenario, opponent number 2 still must manage combat damage from opponent number 1's attacking creatures. Our opponents will never see this spell coming, but they will plan for it each and every time thereafter. Blood on the Snow is not as devious as Winter's Chill, but it still provides us the possibility of coming out ahead of our opponents. We choose either to destroy all creatures or to destroy all planeswalkers. Then we return a creature or a planeswalker card with mana value X or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of snow mana spent to cast the spell. Since there are no planeswalkers in this build at the moment, and our entire mana base is snow, we will return a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield with a mana value of 6 or less. And in this deck, that is 34 out of 37 different creatures, which also includes our general. As mass removal spells go in our snow-centric theme, Dead of Winter may be our most powerful option. All snow creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is equal to the number of snow permanents we control. Note that this -X effect does not target any creatures, so Shroud, Hexproof, Ward, and other forms of protection will not prevent Dead of Winter's effect. Also note that Indestructible will not prevent creatures from dying to this sorcery as well. Since only 2 of the 36 creatures in the 99 of this deck are non-snow, resolving Dead of Winter could tip the battlefield completely in our favor. Now we turn our attention to a few miscellaneous spells that help to strengthen and synergize our snow theme. Search for Glory allows us to search our library for a snow permanent card, a legendary card, or a saga card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. At this time, Search for Glory can tutor for 84 out of a possible 86 permanent cards in the 99 of this build. As a bonus, we gain 1 life for each snow mana that was spent to cast this spell, which, of course, will be 3 life. Whenever Merit Lodge's Slumber or another snow permanent enters the battlefield under our control, we scry 1. At the beginning of our upkeep, if we control at least 10 snow permanents, then we sacrifice Merit Lodge's Slumber and create Merit Lodge, a 2020 black legendary avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. As with the aforementioned Dark Depths, possessing a 2020 flying and indestructible creature token should yield very positive benefits for us, and we have multiple ways of creating it. Cover of Winter has a cumulative upkeep of 1 snow mana, which means that at the beginning of our upkeep, we put an age counter on this snow enchantment, and then we sacrifice it unless we pay the upkeep cost of 1 snow mana for each age counter on it. If a creature would deal combat damage to us and or one or more of creatures we control, we prevent X of that damage, where X is equal to the number of age counters on Cover of Winter. Note that this effect prevents X damage dealt by each creature, and not X total damage. We also can pay a snow mana to put an age counter on this enchantment. Cover of Winter provides us more benefits for playing the long game, as we and our creatures are well protected in combat for as long as we can afford to pay this enchantment's cumulative upkeep cost. Glacial Plating and Rime Transfusion are auras that enchant creatures. Glacial Plating also has a cumulative upkeep cost of 1 snow mana. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3 for each age counter on it. Rime Transfusion gives enchanted creature +2/+1. It also gains an activated ability. For 1 snow mana, enchanted creature cannot be blocked except by snow creatures until end of turn. As we will see later in this video, these auras are considered win conditions when attached to some of our soon-to-be showcased creatures. Now is the time to showcase our creatures. There are various utility benefits provided by our creatures. In this section, we have creatures that provide mana ramp. Boreal Druid taps to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool. We can tap Rime Tender to untap another target's snow permanent. Most likely, this human druid will untap one of our lands for the purposes of ramping out our spells ahead of curve, which is exactly what Sculptor of Winter does. When Spirit of the Alderguard enters the battlefield, we search our library for a snow land card, reveal it, and put it into our hand. This 0/4 Bear Spirit gets +1/+0 for each snow permanent we control. With a splash of evasion, Spirit of the Alderguard could be a massive threat on the battlefield. We can pay 3 generic mana and tap Svella Ice Shaper to create a colorless snow artifact token named Icy Manolith, which can tap to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Paying 3 mana for a mana rock is reasonable, especially when it is stapled onto a creature as a repeatable activated ability. As a second activated ability, we can pay 6, a red and a green mana, and tap Svella to look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may cast a spell from among these cards without paying its mana cost. We put the rest of these cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. We must view Svella's second ability as a potential extension of our hand, as it provides us some versatility, especially since it can be activated at instant speed. Although it does not produce true mana, as long as Centaur Omen Reader is tapped, creature spells we cast cost 2 less to cast. This cost reduction is a viable method for casting creature spells ahead of curve, which is the goal of ramping mana. We do not need to worry about this creature's vulnerable toughness. As we have demonstrated throughout this video, we have ways of buffing our creatures, which makes Centaur Omen Reader's cost reduction ability more reliable than it may appear. Whenever Jorn, God of Winter, attacks, we untap each snow permanent we control, which most likely will be our entire board. The backside of Jorn is worth considering as an option as well. We can tap Cauldring the Rime Staff to allow us to play target snow permanent card from our graveyard this turn. If we do, then it enters the battlefield tapped. Note that this ability allows us to play target snow permanent card, which means that we could play a land from our graveyard as an option. In either form, this card provides resource advantages that assist us in gaining and maintaining tempo. We also have a slew of creatures that provide us with card advantage. When Icefang Coatl enters the battlefield, we draw a card. This snake has Death Touch as long as we control at least 3 other snow permanents, which, in this build, is easier to do than Sunday Morning. The collateral also has flash and flying, which means we can cast it at any time we could cast an instant. We can flash this creature into play after an opponent declares their attackers against us, have it replace itself in our hand by drawing a card, and then block and kill that opponent's best attacking creature through its Death Touch mechanic. Frost Augur lets us pay a snow mana and tap it to look at the top card of our library. If it's a snow card, we may reveal it and put it into our hand. Our likelihood of putting this card into our hand is very, very high. Pilfering Hawk is a 1/2 with flying, and we may pay a snow mana and tap it to draw a card and then discard a card. A Darkar Valkyrie provides a type of card advantage through Graveyard Recursion. We can tap her, and when target creature other than a Darkar Valkyrie dies this turn, we return that card to the battlefield under our control. Note that we can target any creature on the battlefield with this ability, and not just ours. Also note that this angel has flying and vigilance stapled onto her 4/5 body, which allow us to send her into combat, have her available for defense, and be able to activate her recursive ability at any time. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, Draugr Necromancer exiles that card with an ice counter on it instead. We may cast spells from among cards in exile our opponent's own with ice counters on them, and we may spend mana from snow sources as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. With this zombie cleric, our opponent's exiled creatures become an extension of our hand, and we are able to cast these creature cards easily through our snow-centric mana base. Olran Frostfang gives other attacking creatures we control Death Touch, and whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. This dynamic makes combat even more of a headache for our opponents. Do they block down our death-touching creature and lose their creature? Or do they let a little combat damage trickle through while also putting a card into our hand each time? Decisions, decisions. Olran Viper is a self-contained version of Olran Frostfang. Whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, that creature is destroyed at the end of combat. This is a slightly nerfed version of the Death Touch mechanic. Whenever Olran Viper deals combat damage to a player, we may draw a card. This snake presents the same dilemma for our opponents. Trade down with a 1/3, or take a little combat damage and put a card into our hand. We have some creatures that can interact with our opponents on their sides of the battlefield as well. Blizzard Strix has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, if we control another snow permanent, and we will, then we exile target permanent other than Blizzard Strix, and then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This bird provides a lot of versatility, from combat chicanery and permanent protection to opponent disruption and potential creature removal. If that creature is a token, of course. We can tap and sacrifice Priest of the Haunted Edge to have target creature get -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of snowlands we control. We can activate this ability only as a sorcery, which does take some of the luster away from this activated ability. However, the -X/-X is a great way to remove an indestructible creature from the battlefield. When Blizzard Spectre deals combat damage to a player, we choose one of the following two options. Either that player returns a permanent they control to its owner's hand, or that player discards a card. One way or another, an opponent's resources are lessened when they are dealt combat damage by the evasive Blizzard Spectre. Continuing our trend of flying and interactive creatures, we can pay a white mana and tap Squall Drifter to tap target creature. Icebreaker Kraken has a mana value of 10 and 2 blue mana, but it costs 1 less to cast for each snowland we control. We easily can cast this 8/8 for just 2 blue mana. When Icebreaker Kraken enters the battlefield, artifacts and creatures target opponent controls do not untap during that player's next untap step. We can return 3 snow lands we control to their owner's hand in order to return Icebreaker Kraken to its owner's hand. Bouncing 3 lands back to our hand could be seen as a pricey investment, but it may be worth it in order to recast this Kraken and keep an opponent's artifacts and creatures tapped during their next turn. We can pay 2 generic mana and tap Hydar Rimewind Master to return target permanent to its owner's hand. We can activate this ability only if we control 4 or more snow permanents, which we will. Hydar is one of only 2 non-snow creatures in this build, but his powerful activated ability warrants his inclusion into this deck. Note that we can return our own permanents to our hand with this ability, and not just our opponents. We can use Hydar to return Icebreaker Kraken to our hand at a much more reasonable cost. Lastly, in this section, we can pay 2 generic mana and a snow mana to have Rime-Scale Dragon tap target creature and put an ice counter on it. Creatures with ice counters on them do not untap during their controller's untap steps. Some of our creatures have some combat enhancement abilities that make our side of the battlefield a bit more threatening to our opponents. By paying 1 generic mana and 1 snow mana, Frostpeak Yeti cannot be blocked this turn. This built-in evasion helps to make Frostpeak Yeti a potential threat when paired with any peripheral power-boosting effects. We can pay this same activation cost to give Grim Draugr +1/+0 and Menace until end of turn. A creature with Menace only can be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Note that Grim Draugr's ability can be activated multiple times. Each time we do so, it gets another +1/+0 and makes it even more menacing. Saddled Rhymestag gets +2/+2 until end of turn, as long as we had another creature enter the battlefield under our control this turn. Ascendant Spirit begins as a 1/1. If we pay 2 snow mana, it becomes a 2/3 Spirit Warrior. If we pay 3 snow mana thereafter, it becomes a 4/4 Spirit Warrior Angel, and we put a flying counter on it. When we pay 4 snow mana thereafter, we put 2 +1/+1 counters on Ascendant Spirit, and it gains when this creature deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. Whenever we cast a creature spell, if we used snow mana to pay for any of that spell's colors to cast it, then Boreal Outrider has that creature enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. With this Elf Warrior on our side of the battlefield, every creature spell we cast will have that creature enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it due to our snow-centric mana base. Narfi Betrayer King gives other snow and zombie creatures we control +1/+1. We can pay 3 snow mana and return Narfi from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Note that Narfi's recursive ability costs just 3 mana, while his mana value is 5. Since our entire mana base is snow-centric, recurring Narfi from the battlefield over and over again will be easier than Sunday morning. Not bad for a 4/3 that provides an Anthem effect to nearly every creature in our deck. Diamond Fairy is a 3/3 with flying, and we can pay 1 generic mana and 1 snow mana to give creatures we control +1/+1 until end of turn. This mass buffing is considered a win condition here, particularly when paired with any of the many evasive creatures inundating the 99 of this build. Our land base can be utilized as a win condition through Avalanche Caller's activated ability. We can pay 2 generic mana to have target snowland we control become a 4/4 elemental creature with hexproof and haste until end of turn. The hexproof enablement prevents spot removal, and the end of turn effect denies our opponents any opportunities to cast mass creature removal sorcery spells, which would send our elemental land creatures to the graveyard. These creatures are our beatdown options. Aside from our general, these are, literally, the biggest threats to our opponent's life totals. By utilizing our mana base, both Chilling Shade and Hailstorm Valkyrie have the potential to deal a lot of combat damage. They have evasion in the form of flying, and the Shade gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each snow mana we pay, while the Valkyrie gets +2/+2 until end of turn for each 2 snow mana we pay. It also has Trample. Speaking of Trample, both Abominable Treefolk and Conifer Worm have it. Abominable Treefolk's power and toughness are each equal to the number of snow permanents we control, while we can pay 3 and a green mana to give Conifer Worm +X/+X until end of turn, where X is equal to the number of snow permanents we control. Note that we may pay this worm's activated ability multiple times each turn, which provides us the potential to one-shot an opponent. Also note that when Abominable Treefolk enters the battlefield, we tap target creature an opponent controls. That creature does not untap during its controller's next untap step. Through their evasion and massive power and toughness, these 2 creatures are forces to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Speaking of a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield, Rhymefeather Owl has flying, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of snow permanents on the battlefield. We can pay 1 generic mana and a snow mana to put an ice counter on target permanent. Permanents with ice counters on them are snow. Note the synergy that this bird has with the aforementioned Rhymescale Dragon through its ice counter delivery system. We have a couple of miscellaneous creatures to showcase before bringing this deck tech to a close. Drift of the Dead is a wall with Defender, whose power and toughness are each equal to the number of snowlands we control. Although we are unable to attack with this creature, it provides an intimidating presence on our side of the battlefield as a blocker. We may have Morit of the Frost enter the battlefield as a copy of a permanent we control, except it's legendary and snow in addition to its other types. If it's a creature, it enters the battlefield with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on it, and it has Changeling, which means it's every creature type. Note that Morit does not have to become a copy of a creature we control when it comes into play. It can become a copy of any permanent we control. We would be remiss if we failed to mention an eventual inclusion into the snow-themed build. Isu the Abominable is a 5/5 Yeti that allows us to look at the top card of our library at any time. Isu allows us to play snowlands and cast snow spells from the top of our library. These powerful abilities make the top of our library an extension of our hand. Whenever another snow permanent enters the battlefield under our control, we may pay a green, a white, or a blue mana. If we do, then we put a +1/+1 counter on Isu. Thus far, Isu has eluded my efforts to incorporate it into my collection, but it is only a matter of time until this deck becomes 1 Yeti deeper. Due to its green, white, and blue colored identity, Isu is not a candidate to become the general of this deck. We do not want to lose black and red as color options in this build. Once a copy becomes available, Isu easily supplants Saddled Rhymestag, which can be considered the weakest creature in the deck. Soon, Isu, soon. This Cromat build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a Cromat video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below, on our YouTube page, or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. A video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, a series during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this Cromat deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.